Being human.
Why does political satire tend to be liberal? Well, underlying psychological traits could explain why political satire tends to be liberal. The need for cognition, which is a psychological term used to describe the enjoyment of thinking and analyzing problems, could help explain the differences in humor appreciation between liberals and conservatives. This is according to new research in psychology of popular media culture. Political conservatives tend to score lower on a measure of need for cognition, which is related to their lack of appreciation for irony and exaggeration. So, Frank, what do you make of the liberal media or irony being something that's more served to the liberals than the conservatives?
Well, this is another article where I've never even would conceive of this as a research question, but it's really cool. And it makes sense for me in that I think conservatives tend to operate on belief. They're less curious. They're more kind of black and white. Things are just so fairly rigid. And so that they don't have the mental flexibility, I think, to understand what there's one term in here is called incongruity-based humor. And that's really what humor is the juxtaposition of two things that don't really go together. And also you look at conservatives tend to be more conservative religiously, so a lot of the comedy topics are not going to necessarily stick the landing with this community of people.
So you said that conservatives are more likely to be conservative religiously. That makes sense, Frank.
Jeez. Man, I'm back in 5th grade. Oh, God. Don't hit me.
I have been fascinated with this because if you look at on television especially, the great political satirists and the great comedians, at least in late night and in that space, they all have a liberal sensibility. And there's this kind of easy answer that, well, Hollywood skews liberal and that's why. But it's not just that. It's something more. So if you look at Jon Stewart and now Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers and, Samantha Bee, et cetera, they tend to come from a liberal perspective. And when conservatives have tried to do it, with very few exceptions, it hasn't worked. Like Fox News has had a comedy show-ish, kind of similar thing. It just doesn't work. A lot of it's something about whether it's not just about the hearer of it or the receiver of the comedy. It's about the person who is formulating the comedy. There's a different mind at work there. And so Jon Stewart has this ability to kind of he still does, but not on the air anymore, connect these dots that you would not normally connect. There's a mental flexibility there. There is a willingness to kind of go into territory that might be a little more risque or taboo. So yeah, I think there is something to that difference. I'm a big student of American comedy. And so that has always fascinated me about like, why do conservatives have a harder time pulling this off? And I think it's not just conservative audiences. It's more of it's whether the person who's delivering it is conservative or liberal.
Well, and I love how it talks about some of the conservative statements as like, I don't want to have to think too much to get a joke. Right. And personally, the most gratifying jokes I ever tell are ones that there's somebody in the room that just doesn't get it. Like,
yep.
they can't connect the dots. That's not how humor operates with them. And for me, it's like, oh, I just told a joke to myself. That's pretty rewarding. But, Dave, one thing you've talked about in the past is you tend to find yourself pretty moderate, kind of right down the middle, and maybe you swing a little left or right on various things. And I have this theory about liberals and conservatives that I think kind of reinforces that you're a moderate, because you really do appreciate humor and satire. And so I think that leans more towards that creative, flexible thinking part that you have. I've always had this theory that conservatives really like inspirational, happy films, which I think you fall for, that I find a little too sentimental at times. And I think that's really where some of that more conservative kind of part of your brain that just likes a happy ending, likes everything to wrap up and work at the end, that I find taxing at times.
Yeah, me
Well,
too.
I like both. Yeah, I mean that's it. I like Game of Thrones and I like This Is Us. You know, I like
Yeah.
all of that. Yeah. So I do. I do agree. I think that does tap into the more conservative. We want kind of the sentimental, we want the happy ending, that kind of piece of it. But yeah, it's fascinating. I'd love also for us to think about when it does work, when there is a conservative comic, what makes that work? For example, like Dennis Miller, or I'm hard pressed to come up with a lot of others. I mean, Jim Gaffigan's probably a little. He's a pretty devout Catholic. I think he's a little more on the conservative side. When it works, like, what is it about them that makes that work? That's a fascinating conversation.
Thanks for watching this Being Human segment from the Shrink Tank podcast. To watch the full episode, click here, or to check out previous episodes, click here.